was something that could absolutely ruin her, and she was personally insulted by it, but I think more she knew as a businesswoman and a very savvy businesswoman what the costs of that kind of scandal could be, and she was willing to risk anything to make sure that that didn't happen.
She fired off angry telegrams to the offending newspapers. Woman posing as Annie Oakley in Chicago is a fraud. Contradict at once. Someone will pay for this dreadful mistake. Most newspapers quickly retracted the story. Many apologized to Oakley directly. But that was not enough. She brought libel suits against every newspaper that had published the story.
She just goes after these newspapers relentlessly, suing them one after the other. You know, I've got to clear my name. It's not about money. She actually, you know, Annie, who cares so much about money, is spending money to hire fancy lawyers and to prosecute this injustice that's been done to her.
That terrible piece nearly killed me, she wrote. The only thing that kept me alive was the desire to purge my character. Oakley became a woman obsessed. Over the course of 6 years, she crisscrossed the country, suing 55 newspapers. It was the largest libel action the country had ever seen.
She had fought very hard to earn her own security, to have a good name, and to be the kind of person that everybody would see as a role model and as a social icon, rather than somebody who was just a dirty, poor person and somebody who'd be a victim. She was never, ever going to be a victim again.
William Randolph Hearst fought Oakley tooth and nail. He even sent a detective to Greenville, Ohio, to dig around in Oakley's past, sure he could find something to discredit her in court. But there was nothing to find. Annie approached every trial with great care. The courtroom was now her arena.
Were you ever arrested?
No, sir.
Were you ever locked up on a charge of larceny in Chicago?
No, sir.
Did you say, I began the use
The girl of the
drugs
Western
years
Plains,
ago,
now dressed
stating
mostly
under
in
the
black,
strain of the
with
life
demure
of
diamond
life,
earrings,
now it has lost
her now
its
gray
meaning.
hair worn up on her head.
I never made those remarks.
She was reported to exude an air of perfect refinement and polished courtesy.
Uncontrollable appetite for drugs has brought me here.
I don't know what the use
What
of
effect
drugs.
did the article have upon your mental feelings?
I felt as though I could never possibly face an audience until the wrong.
The plaintiff is the same Annie Oakley.
It's false, malicious,
This
and
is the
damaging
same
to the
woman
plaintiff.
who would turn handsprings to show off her legs.
I beg your pardon, you're wrong.
We, the jury, find in favor of Annie Oakley.
Find in favor of plaintiff in suit, Mrs. Annie Oakley Mosey, in the sum of
Oakley won 54 of the 55 cases. Hearst had to pay her $27,000. But most of the awards were much smaller. After expenses, she actually lost money over the course of her 6-year campaign.
I think her reaction to the inaccurate story in the Hearst newspapers might seem to us really excessive. She spent so many years contesting and suing one paper after another for continuing to report an erroneous and insulting story. But I think you can understand her deep concern over that if you see it in the context of this need to control her self-presentation, to be the person who would define her own image, and being ladylike and being respectable was such an important part of that delicate balancing act.
The court battles finally behind her. Annie Oakley, now 50, signed for top dollar with the new Wild West show. At first, she packed in the crowds, but over time, the audiences dwindled.
One of the things that had happened to Annie Oakley by 1910 is that she had become an artifact of the past. Her fame was founded on shooting. Her fame was founded on a skill that had been necessary in the winning of the West, but was now no longer so necessary or even so saleable. The whole medium that had made her a star had lost its audience to the movies.
Oakley retired in 1913, but was uneasy leading a life of traditional domesticity in her new home in Maryland. Annie, Frank joked, was a rotten housekeeper. The butler sold the house and went back on the road, but now it was for pleasure, following the seasons to pursue their passions for guns and hunting. Still, Annie Oakley never left the public eye. She used her celebrity to encourage women to be physically fit and taught thousands to shoot.
She was a very early advocate of women's use of firearms for self-defense. She believed that it was thoroughly appropriate for a woman to have a gun at her bedside. And she also argued that women, especially if they had to be out and about alone, ought to think seriously about carrying firearms for self-protection.
This is when she starts sounding like a feminist. You know, I think women should have the right to protect themselves and carry a gun. And she even appears in the Cincinnati newspaper article showing how to hide your gun under an umbrella so no one will know you have it. And then if someone attacks you, you can pull it out.
Even in retirement, Oakley walked a fine line between being the powerful, self-sufficient woman and the refined Victorian lady. She had once offered to lead a company of 50 lady sharpshooters to fight in the Spanish-American War. But for the most part, she left politics to men. Annie Oakley didn't even think women should be allowed to vote.
Although she did not espouse women's suffrage and she didn't talk about all of the issues that were important to the so-called new women of her time, arguably, Annie was living a lot of the values that her feminist sisters were arguing for. She was one of the first really hardcore advocates for equal pay for equal work. She just couldn't go that extra step to argue openly that she agreed with feminists, and perhaps she didn't. Perhaps she didn't see herself as needing feminism to achieve what she had been able to achieve.
One afternoon in 1922, a charity event drew thousands to a Long Island racetrack. The main attraction was a little woman with white hair. She skipped into the arena, adjusted her spectacles, and signaled her husband of 46 years to begin. Miss Annie Oakley was the hit of the afternoon, wrote the New York Herald. She said she felt a little out of practice, but old-timers said that during the 16 years she was with Buffalo Bill, she never gave a more entertaining exhibition. It would be one of her last. A car accident later that year shattered her ankles and fractured her hip. She would never again walk without a leg brace. It was over now. Annie had her shooting medals melted down and donated the money to charity. She was 66 years old and weakening. Some believe that lead poisoning, brought on by years of handling lead shot, was the cause. On November 3rd, 1926, Annie Oakley died at home in her sleep. It was one of the rare times that Frank could not be at her side. He himself had fallen ill while traveling in Michigan. 18 days later, Frank, too, was gone. They were buried beside each other in Greenville, Ohio, not far from Annie's childhood home.
The career, the achievements, the magic of Annie Oakley is so extraordinary that you cannot imagine that anybody could have created a character like that. It had to be a real person that did what she did and had a 66-year life of incredible experiences and achievements and adventures that has no match in American history.
If Annie Oakley were simply the cowgirl or simply the sharpshooter, she probably would have been forgotten a long time ago. But she's such a complicated package, constantly challenging us to think and rethink our ideas about what it means to be female in American society.
The great mythology of Annie Oakley came later when she became a subject of popular culture, probably best known in Annie, Get Your Gun, which is a total disruption of what her career in life was really like. Nonetheless, the real Annie Oakley created an indelible image as the self-reliant, empowering figure at a time when women just didn't do what she did. And she managed to do it and continued to be very much the lady.
There's never been anybody like Annie Oakley. There's never been somebody who had both the power of the gun and this power of a kind of sweetness and purity that makes her safe even though she's holding that gun in her hand.
There's more at American Experience Online. Visit companion websites for each American Experience episode with interactive features, additional interviews, plus rare videos and photos. All this and more at pbs.org.